All right. So where's everyone tuning in from? London. Scotland. Sorry, and I will apologize. I am currently traveling. I'm going to be sharing my screen here as we go. Ohio. That's awesome. I'm in Ohio. Right. All right. And I wanted to turn on live transcript. Here we go. All right. Well, I am super excited to join you guys and to just be talking about writing compelling multiple points of view in your stories. This is something that I've become quite passionate about with recent works. I really love writing character development, character relationships. So, writing from multiple points of view in my stories is something that I've come to greatly love. So, I'm really excited to share some tips with you. Um, as you probably can already guess from joining this, my name is Rachel Schade. I write YA epic / high fantasy. I've published a trilogy, the Silent Kingdom series. That I technically published the first book back in 2016, but I rebranded and kind of really started my career, I would say, as an indie author in late 2018. So that whole series is complete. That series I mostly wrote from one POV, and then in the final book, I started adding another POV. And then my new series has been full of numerous POVs. Empire of Dragons is the first one that released this past September, and then I'll be releasing 3 more books in 2022 in that series. So, yeah, I've been writing basically my whole life. I went to the Ohio State University and obtained my bachelor's in English. So it's been a lifelong passion. I do want to say I will be opening up for questions at the end. So if you do have a question, feel free to jot it down. And then when I tell you to ask, I will be happy to answer any questions if there's anything I overlook in this. So I'm guessing you're here because you want to write multiple POVs in your story, or perhaps you're already working on that. So let's get into it. So there's a lot of pros and cons with writing multiple POVs. If it's something that you've already been working with, you probably already kind of have an idea why it's a good choice for some stories, why maybe it's not a good choice for others. But some of the benefits are the fact that you can see multiple sides of a story. Sometimes this is great depending on the story you're telling. So with me, when I'm writing epic fantasy, there's usually a lot of points of views happening. There's multiple locations. I'm writing on a large scale. So it really fits the story I'm writing to include multiple points of view. However, there are times maybe you're writing a book where you need to have an unreliable narrator. There's one case, and I don't want to give you guys spoilers, but there's a pretty well-known mystery author who did this writing, I believe it was even in first person. So it's almost like you're reading this character's journal, and this narrator ends up being unreliable. If she told the story any other way, that big twist at the end, realizing this narrator is not reliable, wouldn't have been as effective. So that's kind of a big thing, is to know whether or not it's really going to benefit your story to include those multiple POVs. Another thing is that readers can be in on the action and large scale stories. So like I was saying with my fantasy books, I've got stories that span, numerous locations. They also span different sides of a brewing war. I'll just put it that way. So I'm trying to help readers sympathize with both sides. So having those multiple POVs is very important. Maybe your story actually includes various times. I don't know, maybe you're writing sci-fi, you've got some time travel, but you've got a character who's in the past and one who's in the future, and you want to show that. That would be a great benefit to have those multiple POVs. There's also the fact that you can help readers relate better to characters they might not have otherwise understood. So perhaps you decide you want multiple POVs and you have a villain and you don't want readers to completely hate the villain. Maybe you want them to be able to empathize a little with the villain. So including the villain POV can be very useful in this scenario. And finally, what I mean at that last point, readers are given an insider view into all sides and dynamics of relationships within a story. What I mean by that, I think it really applies well if you're writing, say, romance or any sort of book that's really heavily focuses on character relationships. That way, if you're writing a romance, you're not just getting one character's thoughts and feelings and emotions regarding this brewing romance and relationship. You're also getting the other characters. So you can kind of really understand better what obstacles are maybe in their way, when they're both falling in love, all of that fun stuff. So those are all times in which it's very useful to write multiple POVs into your story. However, as we probably know, anybody who has tried to write multiple POVs, it's not easy either. You have to decide on what person you're going to use, what tense you want to write in. That can really depend not only on the story you're telling, but also what you're comfortable with as a writer. I know in some cases, even some books, some authors have chosen to change the person and the tense as they change POVs. For instance, I believe Veronica Roth did that in her To Carve the Mark duology. I think there was, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been a few years since I read it. I believe she wrote first person for most of her POVs. And I think it was first person present for several. Maybe it was first person past. And then she switched. I think she had one that was in third person and she had another that was in a different tense. It was either past or present. So I don't normally recommend that as a writer myself. I feel like that can be a little bit jarring for a reader. I know when I read those books, sometimes I was kind of pulled out of the story a little bit because I felt like it wasn't consistent. However, again, it depends on the type of story you're telling. There was a case when I wrote Broken Kingdom, the final book in my Silent Kingdom series. So I mentioned earlier, I wrote most of it from one point of view. The first two books were entirely in first person past tense because I was imagining my main character was sort of writing these events down after they'd happened, almost as if you were picking up her journal. So when I added a secondary POV in the final book, I felt like it would fit the story better if I included that one in third person. So third person past tense, I still stuck with my past tense, but I felt that it would make more sense if it sounded as if my main character, Halia, was writing even this POV down herself, as if she'd spoken to this other character and then she decided to write and journal their perspective. So that is why I made that decision. So again, it depends on your story, depends on what fits, and also what you're comfortable with. I personally prefer writing in first person past tense. So that's often what I choose. Again, You also have the challenge of deciding how many POVs to add. I think it's pretty common when writing multiple POVs to do two, especially if you're writing romance, you often do the two main love interests. However, for me, writing fantasy, I'm including a lot more than that. And we'll talk more about how to add numerous POVs later. Another challenge is differentiating between characters. What I mean by that is, you want each character to seem unique, to have kind of their own voice. And if you're writing in a way that makes it feel as if all the characters sound the same or all the characters seem like they have very similar personalities, it's going to be really challenging for readers to tell them apart. So you really have to be careful when you're writing multiple POVs to make sure that your characters all feel really unique. And that's kind of all part of what I'm talking about when I say we should be writing compelling multiple POVs. Also, another challenge is knowing when to change POV. So when do you want to switch from one character's perspective to another? And last but not least, juggling timelines. So I'm going to crack all of these open a little bit more as we continue through the slides. But let's start with deciding on person and tense. So like I mentioned earlier, a lot of it depends on your personal preference, what you're comfortable with as a writer. I know a lot of times people say, write what you know. Obviously, when we're talking fantasy, we don't necessarily know. Like, I've never flown on a dragon. I'm using my imagination there. But I do write what I know in the sense that I write what I'm comfortable with. So if you feel more comfortable, if it comes more naturally for you to write in a certain person or tense and it fits your story, I definitely recommend that. Another factor to consider is your audience and your genre. So what I'm saying there, my audience is YA or young adult. My genre is fantasy. So past tense, I feel like really fits the fantasy genre very well. But for YA audiences, I would say that first person fits really well. So by using first person past tense, I'm really hitting kind of those expectations for both my audience and my genre. Also, the ease of writing multiple POVs in a particular tense person. So, kind of what I was talking about when I was giving that example with Veronica Roth. Is it easier for you? Do you feel that your readers are going to better understand and follow the story if all of the POVs are written in first person? Or do you think you need to write them in third person? Do you think that you're going to be able to differentiate between characters a little bit better that way? As I said before, I would recommend kind of sticking to one person and one tense, not changing that unless you're really confident that it fits your story, because yeah, it can really pull a reader out. And then also I mentioned those like special reasons. So what I meant by that is, you're looking at your story, you as the author know what fits best. So if you're thinking, well, I know this is quirky to change the tense, but since I'm doing time travel, I want one POV to be written in past tense and one to be written in present. In that case, I think that you're not really going to be pulling the readers out of the story and it's going to really make sense for your book. So, like I said, go with what you know, go with what you're comfortable with, go with what fits the story that you're trying to tell. Also, speaking of personal preferences, if you want to mention in the chat what you prefer. So do you prefer writing in first person or third person? Do you prefer present tense or past tense? I always love hearing what writers prefer. And I'm also kind of curious if you wanted to also mention what you prefer to read, because I think it's interesting to know if writers like to write what they also like to read, or if that kind of changes up a little bit. All right, our next challenge. How many POVs? So again, you want to think about your genre and your audience. So in my situation, writing YA fantasy, many POVs, so more than two, numerous ones, that kind of fits. Hi, all. Can you hear me all right? Yes, perfect, perfect. I'm back. Okay. Like I said, I'm traveling. Lost connection for a second. Wanted to make sure before I kept going. Thanks, guys. All right. So, like I said, with my genre and audience, hey, when you're writing to young adults, which includes teenagers, it might be kind of crazy to jump in Game of Thrones style and have like 10 different POVs right out the gate. That might be a lot for a teen to pick, to jump in with two POVs. And then I've gradually added as I've continued writing books in the series. And again, I'll go into that a little bit more. Another element for you to consider when deciding how many POVs you want is the scope of your story. You probably don't these because it's going to be really hard for readers to really connect and care about so many characters and really get a feel for them in just one book. Not saying, I mean, I think there's always exceptions to every rule, but not something I would recommend trying to do. Now, if you're writing a whole series, that's a different scenario. In this current series that I'm writing, I'm going to have 4 whole books. 4 whole books, that gives you a lot of time for readers to really connect to more than just 2 POVs. So I'm continuously adding more. Another element to consider is, are you adding interest and depth to your story as you continuously add more POVs, or are you just adding confusion? Does it make sense to add all of those additional perspectives with all of those additional characters? Think about the story you want to tell. Is it necessary? Does it drive your plot? Does it engage the readers, or are they just going to be lost trying to figure out, why what's his face is talking to us and what role he has in the story? So yeah, think about your book as a reader. What would you like to read? What would you be able to follow? What would confuse you? Another tip about adding POVs, and this kind of goes along with what I was mentioning of what I'm doing right now, is if you're writing a series, you can add additional POVs gradually throughout a series. So maybe you start with a handful of POVs in book 1, but in the next book, you start adding more POVs. This way you can avoid that confusion I was talking about and the frustration for readers and for yourself. It'll be a lot easier for you to really take the time to flesh out these characters. And it will also give the readers more time for them to connect with all of these characters more gradually, so they really feel like they know them. Your genre and your audience is really going to help you decide ultimately how many POVs to start in book 1 and how many to add throughout the series. So like I said, since I'm writing YA, it made a lot of sense for me to start with just 2 POVs in my first book. And then as I continue on, I've added more. So Cursed Empire, the series I'm writing now, like I said, is a YA high fantasy. Empire of Dragons is my first book. I started with 2 alternating POVs, so really simple for people to follow. Chapter 1 is character A, chapter 2 is character B, chapter 3 we go back to character A. So it gives readers a lot of time to start connecting to these characters, to really get a feel for them. Empire of Traitors is book 2 and has 4 POVs, but both of the characters' POVs that I'm
adding on, those characters were introduced in book 1. So readers already feel like they know these characters by the end of Empire of Dragons. So at this point, readers are telling me they're really excited to now get their POVs. So that kind of eliminates any possible confusion. They already feel like they know the characters, but now they're going to kind of dive deeper and kind of really get their perspective and understand who they are. And then book 3, I've added 2 additional POVs, but they're only occasionally kind of interspersed throughout my chapters. And again, those are existing characters. So each time I add another POV from a character that's maybe a side character or a main character that wasn't a POV in the previous book, they're already characters readers know. And so I'm not just kind of throwing in random characters and making readers guess and be like, I don't know this character. This is a lot. I'm getting pulled out of the story. So adding on gradually really helps readers to get to know and care about all of the characters and avoids overwhelming them early on. I don't know about you, but if I pick up a book and there's just a lot of characters right out the gate, and I keep switching POVs from one character to another, it can get hard for me to care about the characters, to keep track of them, and that can get frustrating. So it's really nice when early on you can help your readers connect with those characters. All right, making each character unique. This is a big one, and maybe I would say probably one of the most difficult elements of writing multiple POVs. I know this is the one that always has intimidated me, and this is something that, you know, when I've sent books out to beta readers, this is the thing I always want to know. Am I succeeding at making all my characters come to life? Do they seem like unique individuals? So some things that can help. Knowing each character's personality type. I don't know if maybe you guys have tried writing character backgrounds, or maybe you do some of those character questionnaires where you fill stuff out to really get to know your character. But one of my favorite things to do to really understand my characters is to actually research personality types and even sometimes take personality tests. I'll talk about that more in future slides. Another thing is, of course, knowing your character's background. So where did they grow up? You know, what's their family like? What's made them who they are now? You know, that helps you know how they speak, how they interact with other characters. You know, what are their dreams, their goals? You know each character's greatest fears, their motivations, etc. So the more you know about your character, the easier it's going to be to get into each of those characters' heads and make them sound like unique individuals. And so when you're writing those multiple POVs, it doesn't sound like you're just writing a bunch of the same character with different names. All right. I like to use Enneagram types to develop my characters. This is not the only personality test out there. I'm not saying it's the best one or the only one or anything like that. There's also MBTI. I think there is also one called Big 16. Really a quick Google search, you can pull up all kinds of things about personality types, including free tests. I have actually taken some of those tests before, pretending I'm my character, so that way I can really nail down what their personality type is. So why I do this is because even though sometimes I feel like I have a pretty good sense of who my characters are, sometimes I still get stuck. Sometimes I'm struggling to really think what their individual quirks should be. Sometimes I stop and I'm like, I think this is their motivation. Is this their core fear, or do I have it wrong? So I think doing that really helps them come to life, both for you and your readers. And it really just helps you stay consistent. The reason I prefer Enneagram types, at least for the current series I'm working on, is because Enneagram types really focus on people's dreams, motivations, their core fears. And so it kind of really breaks things down in a very simple way when you're trying to develop a character. Because if you know what their core fear is, you know what some of their core obstacles are going to be that are getting in the way of them reaching their goal. So each of your individual characters, of course, They need a goal that they're striving for. They need something that's motivating them, and they need to have that core fear that probably is related not only to them not achieving the goal, but the best kind of stories are the ones where those fears also get in the way of them achieving the goal. It helps you know what is most important to each character in various situations. So, for instance, if we're going with Enneagram types, there are 9 different Enneagram types. Enneagram type 8 is kind of known as being confident, leader, take charge. They're not afraid of confrontation. Enneagram type 9, which also happens to be my type, they always want to keep the peace. They're not really ones to go and face confrontation. So if you had a character that was a type 8 and a character that was a type 9 in a situation where they were having a disagreement, you would probably be writing your character that's your type 8 as really wanting to win the argument, to be right. They're going to be motivated. They're not going to be afraid to say what's on their mind. And then your type 9 is more likely to want to just smooth things over, to kind of brush it aside, avoid the argument, avoid the conflict, avoid this discomfort, probably try to find a way to just appease the 8 and avoid having an argument. Just be like, well, you know what, it's fine. So that really helps you understand how your characters talk, how they engage with one another. It also helps you know what they might notice most in an environment. So with, again, an Enneagram 9, if their core desire is to have peace, they're probably going to notice and be more upset if they walk into a coffee shop and they see a couple arguing and it's really loud and upsetting. They're probably going to either want to walk out, or maybe they're going to find a quiet corner in the coffee shop and put their headphones on and try to ignore it, because that would disrupt some of their inner peace listening to all of that. So it really tells you a lot about your character when you stop and look at the Enneagram types. So yeah, if you ever find yourself stuck and you're wondering, well, I think my character would act like this or respond this way, is this true? Enneagram types really can help you get unstuck. So here we go. Another example. This is from my series. So book 1, Empire of Dragons, I introduce you to one of my main characters, Jaylee. She is that Enneagram type 8, which I said is known for showing confidence and leadership. They're known for being pretty passionate, opinionated, not afraid to stand up for what they believe in or say what's on their mind. So I have Jaylee very often. She's pretty abrupt. She's blunt. She says what she's thinking. She's not afraid to face confrontation. She does have fears, but she doesn't show them. She likes to put on that confident front, even if she's feeling afraid. This is because one of her greatest fears is being seen as weak or vulnerable, which is very much a type A characteristic. So she's also not great about opening up about her feelings. So despite the fact that she's very passionate, she's probably not going to be the first one to say, hey, I love you, or, you know what, I'm feeling frightened right now. That's just not her style. They're also very protective of both themselves and others. So if she feels like someone's doing her wrong, she's not afraid to tell them about it or to stop them. If she feels like her people are being wronged, which is a big part of the story, she's going to do whatever she can to make it right. So this really helped me, just realizing that she's a type 8, to make sure that I kept her consistent. All right, so moving on. Also in the chat, if you want to comment and say if you've ever used personality types to help you writing characters, go ahead, because I'm always curious to see what other writers like to do. But I'm going to go ahead and move on to when should you change POVs in your story. So let's break this down a little bit. So some things that can help you decide when you should change POVs. If you're writing, say, a romance, this is, again, common situation when we're writing multiple POVs, or maybe you just have two. If you're writing a couple, you're probably going to want to switch it up so you show romantic scenes shown from both perspectives. What I mean by that is if you've got a female character and male character, and you're always showing the romantic moments, the moment when he confesses his love to her, their first kiss, all of those from her perspective, readers might feel like they're getting robbed a little bit, because they're probably going to wonder, well, why are you showing us the guy's perspective if you never let us see into his head? Oh, we know he's getting ready to propose because, the female character, she's figured it out. She, saw the ring or whatever. And we're getting everything, all her thoughts, her in-depth thoughts, and we're not getting his. The readers are probably wondering, well, when did he decide to do that? And what did he think about the first kiss? Blah, blah, blah. So I highly recommend making sure you show them from both sides. So maybe if you write a chapter where they have their first kiss and it happens to be from the woman's perspective, maybe in a following chapter when you write about a moment when he finally confesses his love, maybe you write it from his perspective. So you're really getting his thoughts, his feelings. Another thing is, of course, location. So obviously, whoever is actually present for the crucial scenes needs to be the one telling the story. So what I mean by this is, if you're in a situation like epic fantasy and you've got a character A is in a city and character B is traveling through the mountains, and you need to write a very core scene about a political action that takes place in the city, it's going to be needed. You're going to have to show it from character A's perspective, obviously. So in those situations, okay, you know when to change it, your POV. Another factor to consider is character development. So when you're thinking about the scene you need to write, which character is growing or changing the most in this scene? So when you're thinking about your character arcs, this is something that could be crucial. If you have character A and character B in a scene, and it's character B that needs to make a crucial decision that will change the trajectory of their path and their growth throughout the book or the series in that moment, then you most likely should be writing that scene from character B's perspective. Readers are going to want to know what's going on in their head. This is their moment. This is where we're watching their growth. So asking yourself that question can really help you know what POV you should be writing from, what you should be doing in that moment. Also, what's important in the scene. So if it's a battle scene that affects one character more than another emotionally, that character needs to be the one describing it. So if character A is about to lose their best friend, you should probably be writing that scene from character A's perspective. And finally, the best advice I've ever seen about trying to decide which POV to be writing from in any given scene is to ask yourself, which character has the most to lose in that scene? That should be the character that's telling that scene. So what's at stake here? Who has the most to lose? I wish I remembered which author gave that advice, but I think that is just perfect. So always ask yourself that. All right. And finally, best ways to juggle timelines. This can also get pretty tricky because if you're writing alternating chapters, if you're bouncing around between POVs, if your characters especially are not present, together, if character A and character B are separated, you really have to kind of keep track of time. Are you writing day one from character A's perspective, and then all of a sudden you're jumping forward to day 5 with character B, but then jumping back to day 1 with character A? Unless you're very clear about this, that could get really confusing for readers and confusing for you as you're writing. What I like to do is I like to imagine that my book is like a movie or a TV show playing out for me. Think about a TV show that you really like. My husband and I really love to watch New Girl. And New Girl has a lot of, it's about Jess and all her guy roommates. So you see a lot of different scenes where they're all, throughout the episode, maybe the characters aren't all together. Maybe Jess is at school and she's teaching the kids, and then you switch back to the apartment and Nick and Schmidt are hanging out. And then you see Winston and he's going out, taking someone out on a date. So you're watching all of these different elements play out. Usually for a lot of TV sitcom episodes, each episode takes place in the span of one day. Sometimes that varies, but I like to think about how they do transition in these shows. What makes them so smooth? What makes it easy for you to follow? When do they break from a scene with one character or set of characters to switch to another? Finding those natural pauses that can help you know, okay, this is where I'm going to end this chapter. And then this is where I'm going to start a new chapter with a new POV. Or, maybe I'm just going to do a scene break and then switch POVs. So sometimes watching movies, watching TV shows can really help you kind of think about how to tell a story. Although writing a book is still a different method, really nailing those transitions, there's really a lot of similarities there. Also, think about what fits your story best. If your POVs need to happen on the same or similar timeline, so like my New Girl example, where everything's probably happening within a day, so it all needs to be happening basically simultaneously. Like you're watching a clip where Jess is teaching, when you switch back to the apartment and Nick and Schmidt are talking, it's all happening about the same time, and you're just watching one scene first and then the next. But okay, this is what they're doing all at the same time. Or do you need to jump around in time a bit? Maybe in this case, it's okay. Maybe, like I said, you're writing a sci-fi time travel and you have a character that's in the past and a character that's in the future. Obviously, then you're going to be jumping around and each character is going to be on their own timeline. It's going to be unique. You just need to make sure that you make that very clear for your readers. All right, so here's another example from my writing. So in Empire of Dragons, my first book in my multiple POV series, I have two main characters with alternating chapters. So like I said, I have character A in one, and then I go to character B in the next. It's on the same general time period. Basically, each chapter is roughly one day in each MC's life, but I'm showing it where I'm telling character A's story and then I'm telling character B's story. So what fit my story was to have one whole day from character A's perspective and then just show one whole day from character B's perspective. So in that sense, you're sort of jumping in time a little bit, but it's still very easy to follow. It was easy for me to write. It was easy for the readers. However, it's not necessarily always a perfect timeline match in the early and middle stages of the book. And that's because my characters are not meeting up. It's not like New Girl where at the end they all get together and they chat about their day or anything like that. I'm having both of my characters, they're in the same city, but they're in completely different spaces. They have not met each other. It's not until the very end of the book where I have my two main characters meet. That is the point where it's crucial that my timelines match up. So I keep them similar throughout the story, but at the very end, I make sure everything matches and meshes well. So readers can follow it. And it's very easy for me to write. Actually, I wanted to expand on that before I went on that, because what I wanted to say there was when I mentioned that it's not necessarily a perfect timeline match, is I have one example and I believe it works well. And again, I used betas to test this and alphas actually. But I have a chapter from characters A's perspective where we go through a whole day. We get to nighttime. That chapter ends on like a mini cliffhanger at nighttime. We then start the next chapter from character B's perspective, and we show her entire day. So we end at nighttime. We then start a new chapter from character A's perspective. We pick it up where we left off at night, but then we continue on to show another day. So basically by the end of each chapter, I'm quote unquote catching you up. So the characters, you can kind of tell the characters are still on a similar timeline. So that's what I meant by not having a perfect timeline match, but why it works, because by the end of the book, the timelines match up when the characters meet, when it is crucial. So all of that to say, I know I mentioned earlier that I would open up for questions. I think I've got some already, so I'll go ahead and go through them. But yeah, if you have any questions about developing characters, about juggling multiple POVs, about knowing when it fits your story, or if you want me to expand on any of those ideas further, maybe you want some more examples, feel free to click that Q&A button and type out your question. So let me check out what I've got now. So how do you figure out the timeline for your POVs? So with that one, like I said, it kind of depends a little bit about what kind of story you're telling. So the reason I knew from my book that I wanted my timelines to be more or less the same was because, one, I knew that my main characters were going to meet at the very end of the book. But two, I have an ongoing conflict that both characters are involved in. And so I needed them both to be very present in that story, in the moment. They're both on the same timeline. Let's see, is it okay to switch POV multiple times in the same chapter? I have been writing a manuscript with two main POVs in different locations. So I switch the POV after every scene. Yes, I would say maybe I like to switch POVs chapter by chapter. That's my personal preference, just because I feel like it's really easy to juggle that way and easy for readers to follow. But that's not the only way to do it. You can switch POVs throughout a chapter, scene by scene. So that is definitely okay. And there are instances when I have done it. I guess really you just kind of have to read through it. And also I would recommend getting alpha reader feedback or a critique partner or beta reader feedback to make sure that it works for them and that they can really follow that. But yes, switching chapter by chapter, that's not the only way to do it. Is there any parameter to consider to understand whether the POV is working, or can we try out something else? So I see what you mean by that is whether you want to keep the POV or whether you want to ditch it. And if I'm wrong, please let me know with a new Q&A question, because I will answer that if I'm answering your question wrong. But what I would say is, one, go back to really assessing your story and the story you're telling. So if you feel like this character's POV is crucial to the story, to the overall goal of your plot, then that's a good sign that yes, the POV needs to be in there and it's working. Another thing is, again, I really recommend finding either a critique partner, so like a fellow writer who knows your genre, knows your audience. Maybe they write in the same one, and asking them, hey, can you read this? Can you give me some feedback? Is this working, or should this POV be cut? Another thing is beta readers. All right, is it okay to go back to one character's POV more than others? And do you think there's a certain max of POVs you can write about? Yes, it is okay to write from one character's POV more than others. So actually, again, going back to the series I'm writing about, I say I have 4 main characters, but I tend to consider one of those characters as being my primary main character, my main character. I feel like overall throughout the series, I have written from her POV probably the most. And that's totally okay. It's what fits my story. So if that's what fits your story, that's totally fine. You don't have to have like the exact same number of scenes from one character's POV. You don't have to have the exact same number of chapters, something like that. And as far as a max of POVs you can write about, I would again think about your audience and your genre. So for me, the genre of fantasy kind of opens it up to writing a lot of POVs, but I feel like writing in the young adult audience kind of limits that a little bit more. I really mostly focus on 4 POVs. I feel like if I throw too many in there, it could get really confusing. I would really, I'd really consider your genre. I know like there's some, books out there. If you're writing adult, if you're writing some Game of Thrones style book, you can have a lot of POVs, but I would just really be careful. If it's hard for you to keep track of your characters, it's going to be really hard for your readers to keep track of them. So, just always kind of keep that in mind. And again, going back to asking for feedback, if you get a critique partner or if you reach out to beta readers and you ask for those responses, can you keep track of all of these characters? Is this too much? Do I need to cut back a little bit? So I think it's always helpful to ask for that feedback as you're drafting. It's what I do, and I rely heavily on that. How frequently would you recommend flipping POVs? Kind of depends on the story that you're telling. If you're writing kind of going back to that last question I answered, if you're writing a story where you still have one primary main character, you're going to want to focus most on that POV. But, you can flip back and forth within a chapter. You don't have to change chapters. You could even write your book from an omniscient narrator, what I mean by that is if you're the omniscient narrator, you can basically dive into anybody's head, anybody's POV anytime you want, kind of say, hey, so-and-so is thinking this. So you kind of have to assess what fits your story and go by that. But I don't want to say there's really a general rule. I would just say each time you flip a POV, make sure that you finish the whole scene out before you switch to another POV. So what I mean by that is even if you're switching POVs within a chapter, write an entire scene. So make sure a complete event has happened before, even if it's short, even if it's just a few paragraphs, even if it's one, before you move to the next one. Make sure those transitions make sense. So again, think about a TV show, think about think about a movie, with my example with New Girl, Jess is having trouble at school. She's teaching, before we flip back to seeing Nick and Schmidt chatting it up in the apartment and whatever issue that they're facing, we need to see some sort of event occur with Jess. So whether that's maybe her main problem is that the kids are being really unruly, we need to show a really crazy example where it's just getting really bad, or if it's near the end of the show where she starts to figure out how to solve this problem. All right, Stella says, let's say we have 2 POVs, character A and B. How do you make sure neither one seems more favorable by the author than the other? Oh, that is really hard. So I'm guessing you're saying you want to make sure you don't favor one too much, but also your readers not favor one too much. I find this really interesting actually, because in the book Empire of Dragons that I'm writing, I have 2 characters, like I said, on completely opposing sides. And I often find with my readers that each individual reader tends to connect with one POV more than the other, which I find really fascinating. So I think you're always going to have that a little bit. As for avoiding, which is okay, it's okay, because readers are going to pick their favorite character. It's just going to happen. As long as they don't, unless you want them to hate the other character, as long as they're not completely despising the other character, as long as you've made them somewhat likable, I don't think that's an issue. Everyone's always going to pick their favorite character. For instance, one of my favorite fandoms of all time is Lord of the Rings. My favorite character is Samwise Gamgee, but I love all the characters. I love all of them. They're all amazing. They all add something to the story, but I chose my favorites. As far as when you're writing and avoiding favoritism as an author, again, I feel like you may kind of end up playing favorites a little bit, kind of like my Lord of the Rings example. You might have a character where you're like, wow, this is the one I relate to most. I really connect with this character. I really like writing this character. But as long as you still like all of your characters, I think you're going to be okay. Like I said, in the case of my series, I have one main character that's sort of more of a primary main character. And in that scenario, I feel like it's okay if I show a little bit of favoritism where I'm showing her POV a little bit more frequently than the others because it makes sense for my story. But I love all of my characters. I hope that kind of helps with your question a little bit. Let's see, Morgan, do you have any tips for redrafting a book after writing it solely from one POV and then deciding that it needs two POVs to make the story feel more complete? I'm struggling to adjust my voice when writing for that second POV. So yes, writing from different voices. So one thing that might help since you've already drafted the book completely with the one POV is maybe you just need to sit down and even in a completely new document, so you're not looking at that other POV, is really focus on your new POV. What I do is if you haven't already, I would take the time to take a personality test or do a quick Google search, look up if you're not really familiar with any particular personality test or any types like that, I really recommend looking into Enneagram. I think it's pretty trendy right now, so it's pretty easy to find a lot of stuff, but also it's very easy in that it shows core fears and core motivation. So I think it'd be really easy to break down those for your character. So I would do that. I would look at the Enneagram types, maybe even find a free test that you can take online. There's a lot of resources even on social media. If you search Enneagram, you can find accounts that are solely dedicated to teaching about personality types and posting about them. And those can be really helpful. I love to follow Enneagram type accounts to help me develop my characters. So I'd really focus on that. And then when you can really nail down that character's personality, I think it's going to be a little bit easier for you to start figuring out what their voice will be. Like I said, with my one character, Jaylee being an Enneagram 8, I knew that she was going to be very to the point, very direct. Maybe she'd come across as a little gruff. She's comes across also as a little bit arrogant based on her background and also kind of how confident she is, which some readers like and some don't. But that's kind of who she is. She's sort of that character that you're not sure if you like or not. So yeah, kind of think about what you want readers to get out of it and who your character is. I hope that helps. Good luck with that. That is a big undertaking, but kudos to you for doing that after you've realized that your story will benefit from that. Where do you find other writers to critique your work? So something that I really do, I'm very active on Instagram. I don't know how many of you have followed my account or found it, but that is a big source of where I have actually found beta readers, ARC readers. My alpha readers are actually two close friends of mine who I trust to be honest and who they read a lot. So I know that they know my genre. Something that you can do is you can even post on social media saying that you're looking for, say, critique partners or beta readers. A big thing with that is I would also recommend searching for other writers, look at people's profiles and see, do they write the same genre as you? Do they read the same genre as you? And, building a relationship with them, networking. And don't just try to get something out of it, make sure there's something in it for them. So if you reach out to a fellow author, they're probably pretty busy. But I would, say, hey, I'm really interested in your work. I feel like we both write similar things. Would you potentially be interested in, are you looking for a critique partner? Or, if you're looking for beta readers, make sure you've shared something in your social media about your book. So, tell them, this is the genre I'm writing. This is a little bit about my book. Get them excited about it. So then they're going to say, yeah, I would really love to read your book and I would gladly give you feedback on it. All right, Six of Crows Geology is a great example of switching POV with chapters, having character names for titles. Yes, I agree. Can naming chapters with character names be used to make the information easier for beta readers? Absolutely. Actually, for my series, I don't have chapter names. I just have chapter 1, chapter 2. I think just like Six of Crows does. And I put the character name at the top of each chapter. That helps a lot. I highly recommend it to always put your character name at the top. So whoever is speaking, if you're switching a POV within a chapter, when you put your little page break, I would also include the character's name. So readers kind of get that sense of, okay, we're switching POVs. I'm going to read from this character's perspective now, because they kind of have to switch gears a little bit. You know how when you, as a writer, you have to take a moment and go, okay, I'm about to write in a different voice. Well, think about when you're reading a book, you kind of have to do the same thing. You kind of have to go, okay, I'm back in this character's head now. I'm going to open the chat, make sure I haven't missed anything. Oh, yes, I am doing a recording so that there can be a replay later. So no worries, Mallory. You are so welcome, everyone. I have really enjoyed being able to help you guys out with this. Like I said, I'm pretty active on Instagram. So if you ever want to connect with me on there, follow me. I love to answer DMs. I can't promise I'll always get to it right away or see it right away. If I get a lot of messages, and I will admit, writing a book series right now and also working a full-time job, I am very busy, but I'd love to help out. I try to put advice in my reels and my stories, in my posts. So I would definitely recommend connecting with me on there if you would like to get further advice from me. And don't be afraid to reach out, send me a DM. I will get to it when I am able. Comment on one of my posts, any of that. I'm always happy to help out fellow authors. And yes, there will be a replay of this available. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you guys. And I hope you have an awesome day, and definitely stay tuned for more amazing authors with the Indie WriterFest. So bye.